So, the next lesson is basically in programming, you're going to be working with variables. So, when I say the word variable, and it's not really, it's kind of a related definition, but you might think of back in algebra, like x equals 2, you know, so 3 plus x would equal 5. So, basically, kind of assigning, a number to like a letter, and then you're supposed to basically do math to figure out what the letter is. That's kind of the math definition. The computer definition is kind of different. So basically, the definition of a variable in the computer sense is a piece of data that is stored into memory. I think I want to move that down a bit. It's kind of right next to the variable. A piece of data that is stored into memory. So let's kind of expand on this a little bit. Is when I said, for example, the calculator, right? It had num1. Is the input? A part of the input was num1, num2, and the operator, right? So what I'm kind of saying, as far as this variable stuff goes, is basically you would have a variable for num1, the first number you're going to put in, a variable for num2, the second number you put in, and an operator, variable, however you decide that, would be the operator. And then you can take that input, then turn it into an output. But what has to happen is basically the first thing that needs to happen in the program is it needs to remember what that number was. It needs to remember what that first number was, right? It needs to remember what num1 was, num2 was, an operator. So it's kind of like if someone gives you an instructions, let's say you're supposed to, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of a job. Pick that box up over there, and then clean this, and then iron out that. I don't know. We'll say you have some kind of job, right? So basically what happened is you would remember the instructions you were given, and it would be put in your brain in a way that you'd be able to understand it, and then you would kind of output, whatever you would do. So how a computer does this is basically it would need to assign the pieces of information that is given to variables. So, good example would be, I'm just gonna go to Paint again. So basically, if we're talking about, let's say we're talking about num1. Num1, right? And let's say it equals 3. I butchered that. Sorry, num2. I'm literally writing with my pad on my laptop, just like anything else. I'm not using like a pen or anything. And let's say the second variable for num2 is 5. This is just a calculator program. And I kind of want to explain this. This is kind of a little bit of an advanced concept, but I think you can handle it. Obviously, let's say we happen to be adding them. So we put a plus. What would then happen would be that num1 would be stored into memory. So that num1 would be stored into memory. I'm going to explain this way in more detail, but essentially, it says, okay, I know what num1 is. So it's going to have basically a corresponding, piece of memory where num1 is going to go into, right? And there's actually also going to be a way to, it's going to be kind of like, I'll call it a memory ID for now. That's not the term. It's not the term, but it would have some kind of, it would have some kind of ID, something to know that that this is the piece of memory being allocated to that variable. So I'm just gonna write that. A better word for this is, let's just call it a little bit more of a correct definition. That's too big. Is an address. Oh, font needs to be way smaller than that. Hold on. Oh, I'm trying to bring that box down. Just like you would have an address of a house, there's an address to that piece of memory that's being allocated by that variable. So let's just say it lives at, I'll just call it 0 for now. I'll call it 2. Hold on. Time to go to the brush. Let's say, the memory ID is 1. Okay. Now, num2. Num2. So it's kind of like, let's say like, it's kind of like that's one stuff. That's num1 stuff. It's like a box of stuff, box of memory. So it remembers. So, so we'll do the same thing. And it lives at 2. And then we got op. And op. And it lives at 3. There's a place available at 3. So let's, and I know I'm butchering the boxes, it's just what it is. So basically, so then when the computer is running its calculation, when it figures out, when, the user types in what 1 and 2, the first variable, the second variable, and third variable, like, the first variable, num1, num2, and then the op, the computer so far knows to say, okay, those are the values for these variables, and I can store it here in memory. So that's the main idea. So it's basically a piece of data that you can store into memory. Another concept that's kind of important that I'm gonna this is gonna be the last concept because it's kind of an advanced concept, but it's kind of about data types. So what a data type is if we're talking about, let's say, num1, right? Let's say num1. That would be equal to, like, maybe that could be 3, let's say. Let's say num2 let's say it's equal to 5. I'm just going to make a point about this. And, you know, the op again, let's say it is plus again. So, like, what are these? What are these? 3 and 5. Well, they're numbers, right? They're numbers. They're numbers. Yeah, actually, I should probably just type that. Is are numbers. So numbers are not called just numbers in the computer world. So basically, um, you know, you probably heard the term before in math too, but in programming, you would call these integers. And numbers, integers, what's the difference? I mean, it's not really a difference. I mean, numbers is kind of the way we're thinking of it being called, and integers is a very specific term. Basically means that a type of integer basically means that it's going to be a number with no decimal point. But let's say it was like 3.5 or something. Let's say it was like, you know, something like a bigger number. Turning back to the brush. Um, Instead of 3, let's say it was 3 point like 5, 6 or something. Let's say it was not 3. So this 3.56, would that be an integer? No, that would be more of like a, it could be many things. But for now, in general, it would be something like a double. It would be called a double. And I think the terms kind of vary per programming language, but basically, you know, the type of the variable matters. So basically, you would make, you would kind of, you know, declare the variables. So, like when you're programming, you would declare the variables, um, and at some point you would say num1 is an integer, and or if it was something that dealt with like decimals, it would be more of like a decimal situation. It would be num1 as would be would be a double instead of an integer. But what about this? Um, well, basically, that would be something called a char. I mean, no, a character, because it is a character. You know, it's gonna be plus, minus. I'm not gonna type that. I'm not gonna write that. Character. So, character basically, what that is it's, you know, I would just say, I don't know, like, I almost want to say it's a character. Um, it's pretty much a single piece of a string. Now, what is a string? I threw another term at you, a string. So a string is, let's say, one of the variables, the things that it was supposed to remember was, you know, let's say it was, you know, a greeting variable, and it needed to remember to say, hello to the world. Then basically any kind of any kind of text like this, where it's recording a message, not a number, is going to be called a string. So, so each basic letter right here would be a character. Like a character, that's going to be a letter. That's going to be like it could be like a symbol or something. So that's why I didn't want to say a letter. But it's basically just it's it would be each individual part of it. But sometimes things only require one of them. But basically, there's actually a way to um, turn 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 this string here into like an array of characters and things like that. But that's advanced stuff. Already it's covered more than enough of what I wanted to cover. Um, and see you in the next tutorial.